Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. Getting a rematch in a bowl game is extremely uncommon. And outside of bowls where there are automatic tie-ins for champions and the national championship, so bowls where they don't really have a choice but to do a rematch since they can't avoid it, you will rarely, if ever, see bowl games willingly schedule a rematch of a game from earlier in the regular season. This is so rare that there is quite literally an entire Wikipedia page on every single postseason rematch. They don't do that for common occurrences. In the last decade, not counting the championship, since again, you can't really do anything about that, there has only been one bowl game that took place that was a rematch, and that was the 2016 Heart of Dallas Bowl between Army and North Texas. But even that has an asterisk next to it, because Army accepted their invite before the season ended and before it was determined that there weren't enough bowl-eligible teams. So the bowl had to invite North Texas by default due to APR. Bottom line, rematches don't happen. There are quite a few reasons for this. College football is a short season when compared to other sports and the number of games that you play. So having a rematch occur seems like a waste. Part of what makes bowl season so exciting to watch and so interesting is that you get matchups that never occur, and you get to watch two teams that would never even think about playing each other otherwise. So to have a rematch kind of defeats one of the main purposes of playing a bowl. And especially if the first meeting was a blowout, it's tough to get the general public excited for the game, which negatively impacts television ratings and especially impacts attendance. Why waste money to go to a game and watch it when the first one was bad? So yeah, bowl games that are rematches, for one reason or another, typically don't happen. Which is what makes this story all the more bizarre. Because this wasn't just a case of a bowl game that was a rematch. This is a case of a bowl game being a rematch, even though it was explicitly written into the contract that it could not be a rematch, making it absolutely chaotic. A team accepted an invite, but was on the verge of potentially dropping out because of this violation of the contract. It left a bowl scrambling to find teams and replacements, and oh yeah, this was the first ever installment of this bowl game. So this was quite the introduction and rude awakening to bowl season. Because the game you've been watching this whole time is the 2008 EagleBank Bowl between the Navy Midshipmen and the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. And even though there was a ton of drama on the field, the drama off the field was something else to those in the loop. Because this is the story behind the craziest bowl controversy in the over decade and a half long history of what is known today as the Military Bowl. Before I talk about the actual controversy in question and what made things so bizarre, we need some context to understand the predicament that the EagleBank Bowl was in, as well as why the main team in our story, Navy, was in this spot in the first place. The year is 2008, and the Navy Midshipmen, led by first-year head coach Ken Niumatalolo, are having quite the season, picking up right where they left off from 2007, when Paul Johnson guided them to 8 wins before leaving after the season to accept the job at Georgia Tech. The Midshipmen ended the regular season with a great record of 8-4, including an all-important shutout victory against Army at the annual Army-Navy game by a final score of 34-0, being Navy's first shutout win over Army since 1978, and their largest shutout win since their 51-0 win in the 1973 installment of the annual rivalry game. Combine that with a win over Air Force to win the Commander-in-Chief's trophy, a shutout victory on the road against a Northern Illinois team that went bowling, and a rather shocking 23-21 win against the Rutgers team that was one of the best in the Big East during this time frame, and Navy was picking up right where they left off, easily cruising to bowl eligibility. And the good news for Navy was that they never had to sweat out their bowl and where they were going to be playing. There was no mystery whatsoever, because they knew at the start of the season that so long as they were bowl eligible and met the 6-win requirement, that they would be playing in the EagleBank Bowl. On September 10, 2008, the plans for the inaugural version of this game were formally unveiled, And the goal behind this game, which was originally supposed to be called the Congressional Bowl before sponsorships and naming rights happened, was simple. Give a chance for a military team to play in the nation's capital. The idea was that, in even-numbered years, Navy would get an automatic spot in the game if they were bowl eligible, and in odd-numbered years, Army would get that spot. As Bob Pincus, the vice chairman of the EagleBank Bowl, said on this bowl game, "We want to have a military service team play every year." He also expressed optimism that Navy would become bowl eligible for the 6th straight season, saying on their chances of playing in this game as planned, "I'm looking at the Navy schedule right now. We want Navy to win 6 games. Navy will help come and fill the stadium." Fortunately, as mentioned before, they didn't have to sweat too much, as Navy started the season off 6-3, easily reaching that bowl requirement by around Halloween time. Alright, so that's one part of the equation done and taken care of. Relatively easy and straightforward. That bowl tie-in took no effort or guesswork whatsoever. But obviously, you can't play a bowl game with one team. You need 2 to tango. So who would Navy be playing? Well, as part of the agreement with the EagleBank Bowl, they would be playing the 9th pick from the ACC, so long as that team was bowl eligible. Just like every bowl game that has a conference tie-in, the bowl is obligated, per the terms of the contract, to take a team from that conference. They can't go off script. And it seemed like there was one team in particular that made a ton of sense for the EagleBank Bowl to take. That team was this team right here, the Maryland Terrapins. Maryland was a team that had hovered around the top 25 all season, and finished the regular season with a 7-5 record, although they were 7-3 at one point, and had a legitimate shot at winning the Atlantic Division, controlling their own destiny, before falling to Florida State and Boston College. Still, this was a Maryland team that had beaten 4 ranked opponents, including a top 20 Clemson team on the road, and had some very good players, including wide receiver Darius Hayward-Bay, one of the fastest players in college football, and a player who was so explosive with the ball in his hands as a deep threat that he would get drafted in the first round by the Oakland Raiders the following year. On paper, it made perfect sense to invite Maryland. The easiest way to ensure good attendance at a bowl game is to make it insanely easy for your fans to attend, and to raise the stakes for the game. College Park is a mere 9 miles away from Washington, D.C., where the game was being played at RFK Stadium. No effort required for fans and local alums in the area to get there, relatively speaking. Combine that with the fact that this game would be against Navy, meaning that you've got bragging rights for the best team in the state of Maryland, and the fact that the two schools had a good pre-existing relationship, with the schools making progress on an agreement to play each other in 2010, and this would have been an absolutely great way to kick off bowl season. The EagleBank Bowl would have made a name for itself right away, and might have had a good chance at selling out the game, and filling all 45,000 or so seats. The only problem? Maryland declined the invite. It was nothing against the bowl game whatsoever. It was just the fact that the bowl game was so early in the year, being the first one played on December 20th, that it interfered with final exams. Remember, these are student athletes, and the student comes first. And it wasn't so much that they had exams that was the problem, because you could reschedule them and take them earlier. It was the fact that there were some serious academic problems on the team where the players might not have been eligible to play if they were spending all their time prepping for the game and not enough time studying. As Debbie Yao, the athletic director for Maryland, said on declining the invite after considering it, "There are people who are at academic risk and need every moment of that week to prepare for the exams." So the EagleBank Bowl had to pivot, and they pivoted to this team right here, partly because they were just about the only other ACC team that was eligible, since the rules said that you had to take teams with 7 or more wins before you could take a 6-win team like NC State. They were trying to work out a deal with the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. Wake Forest was a team that entered the season as a top 25 team, and got as high as number 15 in the AP poll following a 3-0 start that included a win on the road against a ranked Florida State team. And even though they ended the season on a somewhat sour note, falling outside the top 25, and going just 3-5 in their final 8 games, they entered bowl season as a solid 7-5 team that had some talented players on it, like Demir Bolden, who led the ACC with 81 receptions and was second with 848 receiving yards, and linebacker Aaron Curry, who led the entire NCAA with 3 pick sixes and who had 13.5 tackles for a loss, being an absolute menace at the position. That was going to be the matchup. Obviously, it's not as ideal as having Maryland in there, just from the geographic perspective and the potential rivalry nature of it. But Navy against Wake Forest is a very good game on paper, nonetheless. There was just one small problem that we haven't talked about yet, and that was the fact that, as I said earlier, Wake Forest started 3-0. Want to know why they didn't start 4-0? Because they lost to Navy. On September 27th, the two teams met down in Winston-Salem, and Navy wound up winning it by a final score of 24-17. That meant that this bowl game was going to be a rematch of a game from earlier in the season. Now on the surface, that's kind of weird, just because you don't see that in bowls all that often. Although there were 2 such rematches from the previous year in 2007, when Purdue met Central Michigan at the Motor City Bowl, and when BYU met Utah at the Las Vegas Bowl. It's odd, but it's not worthy of a story by any means. It's unconventional, but it's not controversial in the slightest bit. The problem? Navy had a very explicit clause in their contract that they signed with the EagleBank Bowl that they would not, under any circumstances, play in a rematch of a game that they played earlier in the regular season. Why did Navy have that clause in there in the first place? Well, the previous year, there were some possible talks about Navy, who had an automatic invite to the Poinsettia Bowl out in San Diego if they were eligible, playing Air Force in a rematch, since the Poinsettia Bowl gets the second choice amongst all Mountain West teams, and Air Force was second in the conference behind BYU. Navy put their foot down and said that they were not going to be doing this, and were not going to be playing Air Force twice in one season, threatening to back out of their agreement if that happened. As Athletic Director Chuck Gladchuk said, "We have no interest in a rematch with Air Force in a bowl game. Navy plays Air Force once a year, and that is an important focal point for each team's schedule. Once is enough for us. There's no rationale that would make sense for me to have Navy and Air Force play twice in a season. It would take away from the pursuit of the Commander-in-Chief's trophy." Fortunately, this was never an issue. Bruce Binkowski, the executive director of the game, said that the policy of the game was that they don't pick rematches, so they were not going to do that, so no harm done. But after that incident, Navy put it in writing in future contracts that they would not do rematches in bowls. And now, here was the EagleBank Bowl, essentially forced to violate one contract. You can't satisfy 2 contracts here. If you honor Navy's contract with a no rematch clause, then there's no other eligible ACC team to pick. So since Wake Forest is eligible, you're violating your contract with the ACC. And if you honor the ACC's contract, you're violating your contract with Navy, since this is a rematch. In other words, no matter what the EagleBank Bowl did, they were going to lose. Either tick off the ACC, or tick off the literal Navy. What a way for your first bowl game to play out. And the bowl game realized that the only option that made sense was to have a rematch. They didn't necessarily want it that way, but that was the only thing that they could do. So how did this all play out in the end? Well, the two sides met once they realized that this was just about the only avenue that they could take. The EagleBank Bowl tried to get Navy to waive their no rematch clause, and Navy tried to get the EagleBank Bowl to find a way to get another team. But in the end, the two sides came to an understanding, and the EagleBank Bowl got the green light to invite Wake Forest, setting up a Navy-Wake Forest game for the second time this season, which this time was won by the Demon Deacons by a final score of 29-19. I would guess that part of the reason that Navy, even if they weren't crazy about it, was willing to at least soften their stance a tiny bit was because that was written after the Poinsettia Bowl with the idea that they don't want to play a military school twice in one season, so as not to diminish the Commander-in-Chief's trophy. They didn't want a spot where, in essence, they be playing Army again, or Air Force again, or even an annual rival like Notre Dame again. But Wake Forest? There's not a whole lot that you can do. And even though Navy said that it would be better if there was a fresh look and they were playing as someone else, Athletic Director Chuck Gladchuk admitted it's the scenario that makes the most sense. If you look at what the NCAA has laid out and what the ACC has laid out, it's conceivable that if you put these two doctrines together, it spits out one answer: Wake Forest. Today, the EagleBank Bowl is still going strong, even though there have been quite a few changes. It got a new name, being called the Military Bowl now. It got a new stadium, moving from RFK Stadium to Annapolis, where the game is now played at Navy Stadium. So obviously, whatever qualms Navy had about this bowl game were water under the bridge, seeing as they wouldn't have let this bowl use their stadium for the last decade or so if this wasn't true otherwise. And it got new conference affiliations, with the military tie-in being replaced by a tie-in from the American Athletic Conference, which is where Navy plays. And honestly, despite all the chaos surrounding this bowl game, it's not too surprising that this bowl game has survived for a decade and a half, when so many upstart bowls have failed. Because if they could survive that whole mess from their first year that was completely outside of their control, they could survive anything. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.